Hi, I'm Cindy Campbell-Stone from Cole Harbour, Nova Scotia. I'd like to congratulate Storytelling Alberta on your 40th anniversary. Woohoo! Now, I participated in the Storytelling Festival back in 2010. It was a 22nd annual Tales Festival. See, I still have the brochure. I had a fantastic time at the festival. And there were many, many wonderful memories. But one of my favorite memories was of a little girl, about 7 years old, I believe. She was there with her family, her mom and her dad, and her little sister, I believe. I can't remember the little girl's name. But the family were all listening to me as I told stories. But I could tell by the little girl's eyes, she didn't, well, she wanted to hear a different kind of story. So after my set was over, I met the family at the door, and I found out that the little girl liked mermaid stories. So I brought the family outside along the boardwalk where there was a set of steps, and we sat on the steps, and I told the little girl the story of the Cape Breton mermaid. Now, this story comes from a book called Folklore of Nova Scotia. The stories were collected by Mary Fraser. The book was published in 1929, but the story itself, called The Mermaid, is just a little snippet of a story. But over the years, I've changed it, and the story has grown. And speaking of growing, that little girl would now be in her late teens, early 20s. So I hope she's listening, because this story is once again dedicated to her. The Cape Breton Mermaid. Once there was a stooped and weathered old man who scuffled along the beach. He looked out to where the waves were just about to break, and he saw a mermaid arise from the sea and perch on a half-submerged rock. Oh, she was dazzling as she emerged, with the water droplets dripping off her like a diamond waterfall. For a moment he was mesmerized by the sheer delight of her. And the sea breeze blew her long hair like brown and red kelp, and in her hands she held a beautiful golden shell sparkling in the sunlight. The old man gazed at that shell. He was reminded of when he was a young sailor on a privateer ship out of Yarmouth, Nova Scotia. The ship was, its cargo, its hold, was full of confiscated treasure. An nor'easter, big storm, blew up the coast. The ship was dashed against the rocks. The wooden hull split open, and the treasure was swallowed by the sea. The old man remembered that as he stared at the shell, and his heart hardened in anger and resentment at what the sea had taken from him. And he called out to the mermaid, "Come to me, my sweet little maid, and let me gaze upon your beautiful shell." She turned her head, startled, and came off her perch and started to swim towards him, for his voice was as mesmerizing as a moonbeam. He waded into the water and came towards her. She held out her hand with the golden shell, and he reached out and snatched it from her, turned around, and started to wade towards shore. "No," she cried, "please, please return my shell to me, for I belong in the deep blue sea." But the old man ignored her, and he kept on walking. She pleaded again and again, but he didn't listen. He went up over the dunes, and he disappeared from sight, along with her shell. The tears fell from her eyes, and the salty tears mixed with the salty sea. Dark clouds came across the sky. The waves grew dark and gray. A big wave picked her up and tossed her up on the dry part of the shore. She landed with a thunk, slightly dazed, but she was conscious of a change in the weather and of a change in her lower body. She watched in horror as her beautiful silvery tail changed into two long, spindly-looking legs, human legs, ugly in her eyes. They reminded her of two pieces of driftwood tossed up on the beach. How was she going to return to the sea without her tail? She needed to get her shell back. How was she going to walk on these legs, these human legs? She started not to feel very well, and she fainted, fell back, hit her head, and passed out. Well, the old man, he wandered down the path, scurried as fast as he could, past the house, into the barn, and he sat upon a hay bale, his heart pounding with his daring and out of breath from the rush. He looked down at the shell, and it was rattling a little bit, so he tipped it over, and out fell 10 golden nuggets. Ah, he said, finally the sea is returning some of the treasure to me. I deserve much more, though. I wonder if that mermaid might know where more treasure would be. Perhaps I can persuade her to look. The wind whipped around the corners of the barn and shook the walls. The old man shivered. It was getting cold. Perhaps he would look for the mermaid tomorrow. Right now, he'll have to bury this shell where no one could find it. Now, the old man had a son, and that son was out hunting in the woods when he felt the change in the weather and thought he better hurry home. He was coming out of the woods, and he looked across the field, and he saw his father hurrying up the path towards the house. He was moving a little faster than he usually does, so the son was a little bit worried. But then at the same time, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something fly out of the sea and land on the shore, something long and white and silvery, and he thought, "Ooh, is that a spirit of the sea?" And then he kind of laughed at his imagination, and he said, "Maybe it's a fish. It'd be a big fish if it was. Perhaps I better investigate on the way home." And so he scurried along the beach until he came to this long, white, shiny object in the sand, and it moaned and groaned. His heart started to pound. He got ready to flee when that thing turned its head and looked at him with beautiful blue-green eyes. It wasn't a ghost at all. It was a woman, and a naked woman. Quickly, he took off his hunting jacket, and he wrapped her in it, and he lifted her up in his arms, and he went up over the dune and down the path towards home, the wind at his back, saying, "Hurry, hurry, hurry, before it's too late." He burst in through the door, kicked it closed with his feet, and went over and laid her in front of the hearth by the warm fire. Just as he was about to cover her with a blanket, the door crashed open, and the old man came in with the wind. The young man got up, and he helped the old man close the door. He latched it, and he laid a heavy bar of wood over the door to keep it shut. In the meantime, the old man turned around and looked into the center of the room, and he saw 2 beautiful blue-green eyes staring at him. His heart began to pound. She held out one of her hands towards him, and with her lips barely moving, she whispered, "You must return to me, my beautiful shell. Return my beautiful shell to me, for I belong, and we belong, in the deep blue sea." The old man clutched his chest, fell to the floor with a thump. The young man turned around and saw his father lying there and rushed over, but it was too late. The old man was dead. The young man, he buried his father in a grave on a hill overlooking the ocean. He was inconsolable for many, many days. He blamed the sea and the weather for the old man's rushing up from the ocean, and perhaps it had contributed to his failed heart. And he blamed himself for not seeing the old man along the path while he was hurrying and carrying the maid. How could he have missed him? The maid listened to all of this, and her heart grieved, not only for the son, but also for her own predicament. She did not say anything about coming from the sea. She didn't say anything about the shell, and she didn't say anything about meeting the old man in fears that he would blame her for the old man's death. But she She had to find the shell so she could return to the sea. But the secret of the shell, where it was hidden, was buried with the old man. She did search for it for many weeks afterwards, but she never found it. The old man had hidden it well. Now the young man, well, his grieving soon turned to nurturing, especially when he saw that the young maid struggled to walk. She had something wrong with her legs, like she didn't know how to use them. And he assumed she didn't say very much because of the bump that she received on her head. It seemed to have affected her memory, too. And he just assumed that she had been a survivor from a shipwreck, although no shipwrecks were reported all up and down the coast. But then again, no one came looking for her. And so he decided to nurse her back to health. And when she regained her strength and her voice, oh, what a beautiful voice she had. She sang in the morning when first arising. She sang in the garden to the birds and the bees. She sang to the animals out in the barn. And she sang when they walked along the beach, hand in hand, under moonlit nights. Soon the young man fell in love, and he asked her to marry him. Well, the young maid, she cared for him, but she didn't love him, but she did agree to marry him. She figured, well, my fate is decided. I will have to live as a human. And so they did marry, and they had many children, 7, 3 boys and 4 girls, and they all had webbed fingers or webbed toes. One day, the children were all playing a game of hide and seek, and their mother was down at the shore gathering mussels. The father was in the woods hunting, and the youngest child, the boy, the golden-haired one, about 3 years old, he went to hide in the farthest corner of the barn. As he was squeezing himself into the corner, his webbed feet hit a board on the floor, and the board flipped up, and there in a hole in the floor there was a golden shell. Oh, the young child picked it up in his little hands, and he hurried out of the barn, across the yard, calling, "Come see what I found! Come see what I found!" he said to his siblings. They went down to the beach, and they showed their mother. The mother, she stared at the golden shell, and a feeling of great longing came over her, and she remembered another life under the sea. And so without thinking, she reached out and snatched the shell. Immediately the change began. She fell down on the sand, and her legs started to change until they changed into a beautiful silvery scaled tail. "Oh," she said, "now my shell has been returned to me. I can return to the deep blue sea." "No, no," cried the children. Don't leave us." The eldest became angry, and he snatched the shell from his mother's hands. He flung it up against the rocks, and it smashed into 100 pieces. 10 golden nuggets lay strewn across the sand. The mother lay screaming in agony. She writhed in pain and screamed and screamed. The children didn't know what to do, except the 4th child, the girl. She knew what was happening. She realized that her mother was dying. Their mother was stuck between the land and the sea. When the shell shattered, something happened. Something changed. The mother's fishtail couldn't change back into human legs, and she couldn't live as a sea creature on the land. Well, then they would have to return her to the sea, and maybe, just maybe, she would survive. So with loving hands, they all picked her up, and they carried their mother out to the shallow, warm waters. And immediately she began to swim around until she swam out, until all they could see was her head bobbing in the waves. The mother turned around and she called to the children with regret and promise. And she told them that she loved them and that she would provide them food for the sea so that they and their father would not go hungry, and that she would sing to them on moonlit nights. All they had to do was listen along a moonbeam. And then she turned towards the ocean's horizon, dove down, and was gone. Now, many years have passed since that mermaid returned to the sea. And her children have all grown and had children of their own, and their children had children, and so on and so on and so on. And some say that somewhere along the coast of Cape Breton in Nova Scotia, there is a village. And those villagers, well, some of them have webbed fingers and webbed toes, and some say that they are the descendants of that mermaid. And some say that if you walk along a beach in Cape Breton on a moonlit night, you might hear the whisper of a mother's song traveling along a moonbeam. Moonlight, starlight, moonlight shines so bright. Moonlight tonight, child, starlight tonight. Moonlight shine on the water.